Okay, welcome to my first Linux video. In this video, I'm going to be explaining how to install Windows XP onto Virtual Box OSC Manager. And in order to do this, first of all, you need to install Virtual Box OSC. Of course, this is the free and open source version of Virtual Machine. I wouldn't say it's a version of Virtual Machine, I would say it's an alternative. And it works just as well. Right, so the reason we wanted to do this is if we want to run legacy programs such as the original Starcraft on their native OS, which would be, I would say, Windows XP, as this game ran best on that system. This is what's called native gaming instead of virtual gaming for legacy games. And the first thing that we need is to actually have burnt the Windows XP operating system as an ISO. So this is Windows XP Pro SP2, which has been burnt onto an ISO image. That is the best thing to do, the most important step in this process. Although you can put the CD directly into the drive as well, and you can access it that way, but this is the best way. Alright, so I'm going to click on New. So once you have VirtualBox installed and opened, I'm going to click on New, Next, and I'm going to call this Win XP Pro, okay? And, well, I'll call SP2, so I know it's Service Pack 2. It's already selected Microsoft Windows, Windows XP version. Depending on the version that you want to run on VirtualBox, you select that, of course. But XP is automatically ticked. Alright, so we have to give it a base memory. We're going to say 512 megabytes because that's adequate to run Windows XP as well as any programs we're going to be putting on Windows XP. We're going to create a new hard disk, which is going to be the virtual hard disk, and this will take a small chunk out of your existing hard drive on your computer because it won't be directly accessible except through your VirtualBox. So I'm going to create a new disk. I'm going to say dynamically expanding storage because what this means is that once you have reached the max drive allotment, it will automatically increase the drive allotment if you're downloading files, for example. I always select this. We're going to go ahead and give the hard drive, we'll say 4 gigabytes of space. Okay. And now it's just summarizing everything that I'm doing. It has done it. I click on Finish. Now, of course, what results here is not your Windows XP yet. This is why you need your Windows XP disk or Windows XP ISO. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the settings of this file, this Win XP Pro SP2, so that it includes Windows XP. So if you go through the menu here, we have General System, Display, Storage. Now it is within our storage that we can go here and we can say CD, DVD, drive. We can actually select choose a virtual CD, DVD, disk file. That's what we want. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go on the desktop where it's located, click on the ISO file. Now I'm going to click OK. So now when the system boots up, it's going to boot up from that virtual disk, so I click Start. So this is now starting the virtual machine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be taken through the Windows setup. Now because this process takes 7 to 8 minutes, it's the standard time for Windows setup and all of everything that it needs to do. That'll give plenty of opportunity to talk about some of the differences between Linux and Windows and why installing Windows on top of Linux is quite a good thing to do for the individual and business for a variety of security reasons, stability reasons, and control reasons as well. So what it's doing now is it's started up the Windows disk as if you had put it into an actual computer, but the computer is actually running inside this virtual computer. So it's not doing anything directly to your hardware. Now what you can see, of course, down here the icons, and it says, okay, when it's accessing the hard disk, you see it flashing and that. Okay, so it's detected an on-partition space of 4 gigs automatically. So we're just going to click enter, select that, and format the partition using the NTFS file system. Click that as default. So now it's formatting. Well, okay, so the first benefit of running Windows on top of a Linux machine as opposed to being dual booted, there's a few advantages, and one is it adds an extra layer of security between you and the internet. So because VirtualBox can be frustrating actually as an individual user, because it's difficult to access the files within your virtual hard drive. It's difficult to do that without knowing and having some expertise of VirtualBox. So any hacker who comes into your system is going to encounter those same problems, and they're not going to have the same access to the system in order to make the upgrades or the changes necessary to get access. So you'd have to literally purposely open VirtualBox up. So it differs in that way, in the sense that Linux tends to be locked up security-wise by default, and you sort of unlock it as you go. So if you leave things locked, have an encrypted home folder, for example, and then run all of your important files on your virtual hard drive, that's the most secure place that you can put files and documents that you wouldn't want somebody from the outside getting access to. So if you want to run a complete, and then even within your virtual machine on your Firefox, for example, you can click on private browsing, and so and there's a variety of things that you can do to keep upgrading your security from there. But the most important thing is that root operating system is Linux, on which you can put as many operating systems as you want through VirtualBox. And then Linux is actually a proper server in that sense. When people talk about servers, they generally are talking about the the large computers that contain many hard disks, or maybe one very large hard disk that's partitioned, and they contain web server information, and they're accessible via the web. When I talk about server, I mean in terms of the classical server, where you have the computer centralized between your printer and other sort of network devices. And in this sense, it's the server for all these virtual operating systems. And within each virtual operating system, you can have a set of different applications that are native to that operating system without having to reboot your machine. And you can just choose between them, close one down, open up another. And in that sense, you're never having to really shut electricity-wise or even restart your computer, which can cause problems. So it's more efficient, the speed is better. So it's much more efficient. And obviously it's cost effective as well, because there's no license to pay for any of the tools that Linux provides, and you can get by just using Linux really without having to resort to any of their operating systems, unless you have legacy proprietary software, especially like games, which are designed not to be easily hacked and easily ported. So you have to have the original sort of emulator for them. And we're not actually emulating anything with the virtual machine. That's what makes it brilliant, is we're actually recreating the conditions under which Starcraft will play well. So we're getting around the sort of idea that you just have a computer on which there's an operating system and a game. You're actually taking an operating system and you're porting that around to other computers. And so the compatibility layer to that, if you want to call it that, is VirtualBox. This is what creates the virtual machines which can be ported, on which you can put Windows XP and then Starcraft or whatever other legacy software you want to use. And so we're nearly done with the first part of the Windows setup now. And at the end of this process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to load, install, and test Starcraft. Now, of course, people always also argue with Linux. They say, okay, well, it's a steep learning curve, and obviously, if you want to try to change computers over to Linux, then you're going to have to retrain all of your staff. And the answer to that is actually that's not true, because with VirtualBox, you can have people boot the machine and view the Linux platform as the login screen. So by logging in to the Linux, right, they are logging into the base system. And then, as you can see before you with the Microsoft Windows XP logo, when they actually go onto their workspace, they go onto the virtual machine as opposed to the Linux machine. And in that sense, you can almost say, well, if you want to have social networking, you can do that on your base Linux system. You can do that sort of thing. And it does not mean that anyone that person is social networking with will have access to the machines within VirtualBox. So it sort of makes things much more secure from a governmental point of view, from a security point of view in that sense. Because, you know, instead of having a system that, if hacked, contains all the information, even with encryptions and that, you have a system in which you can have all the encryptions, you can have everything that you used before with the native operating system as well, antivirus, you know, programs included. Because obviously you don't want your virtual machine, you want it to stay clean. Although having said that, it's a lot easier to remove viruses as well, because everything is stored within a file, within a, it's like a sandbox, isn't it? So viruses cannot jump outside of that sandbox and infect your Linux machine. In fact, but they don't speak the same language, so they actually can't do that. You know, and not only because it's not compatible with the system, but also because it's existing purposely within that sandbox. So that means you can treat the file which contains the registry and everything else within a folder, and you can just scan it as a folder. So nothing within the operating system is active at the time that you're scanning for the virus, which is really important, because no matter how well a system is equipped with antivirus software, if you have to run that system with the antivirus software with a potential virus on that system, the whole system is compromised, because it can compromise the antivirus software as well. So if you can run an external system which can scan a file folder with no active files, you know, files that can't act outside of their sandbox, then you can permanently delete viruses, and they can't replicate themselves as you're deleting them, detecting that you're doing that. So VirtualBox has a number of advantages in that sense. It's so easy to control all the stuff that you used to do with the registry and all of that, which you had to do from within your own machine, or if you were doing you know, networking, the admin would do this on individual machines. But again, they're still suffering the same problem, because then you can actually get viruses that can swim upstream through the admin network, because they're running the same operating system and they're connected by virtue of Windows networking tools, which are quite vulnerable to security problems. So another advantage of VirtualBox, of course, is the way that you can manipulate the files within it when that operating system is not active. Even to a certain extent, even when the operating system is active, it still doesn't have any access to any hardware that is connected physically to the computer. So unless you've enabled USB. Now, even if you've not, you can disable USB from VirtualBox. So if somebody is using a memory stick and they want it to load on the Linux background, they can do that. They can manipulate files there, but it won't be accessible within the simultaneous running VirtualBox. So we're nearly done installing devices. Of course, that's a great thing about VirtualBox as well, is, you know, people always worry when Windows is installing, oh, is it going to detect all of my hardware? Am I going to have to download any drivers? Well, the great thing about VirtualBox is, as long as your Linux machine is set up properly with all of its settings. Okay, now I've captured the mouse now. In order to uncapture, you click the right control key. But in order to capture, you put it in. Anyway, we're going to click on next so that we can get through this. Type your name. I always like this organization, which is, I'm going to put in Atomic UK. Okay, click next. You have to capture the mouse in order to work within some screens. It's asking for an admin password. We're going to leave that blank. That's another advantage to this, is because it's in VirtualBox, we can just basically get rid of the admin password, because we've already got one in Linux. But you can put an additional password on top if you like. Automatically just clock, okay? So now it's installing network. So nothing has to be working, nothing has to be connected to the outside world. You can get an internet connection within VirtualBox, and if you do that, then people will have access to the Windows VirtualBox, but they won't have access to your Linux box. So in other words, if you do want to communicate with people via the web in a very secure way without them having access to important files underneath, if you store all of your important files within the Linux machines, we're looking at it from the other side now, then you can assure that even though you're sharing the internet connection one way, there's no way for them to take that internet connection and use it to access files, because the layer, which is VirtualBox, the layer that is VirtualBox, let's see, it's asking work group, so we'll just call it group. It cannot move that direction. It cannot move that direction. It cannot come outside of that sandbox and access files on your Linux machine, because there are a number of barriers to that. One being the fact that VirtualBox is a virtual computer, and within that virtual hard drive, it's like a universe, and the only thing that they would be able to access is that virtual hard drive. That's the way that it works for that universe. I mean, theoretically, they are connected, and there might be some back ports, channels, ways of getting in. But even if they do that, then they have to contend with Linux's own file system and Linux's own protection on its files. And if you have an encrypted hard drive, obviously, I mean encrypted, yeah, if you have a encrypted home file, I mean that's going to trip them up, and they're not going to be able to get through that. And then even if they got through that, they would have to realize that, are your files readable? Are they only viewable via an admin? And at that stage, they have to figure out an admin password. So you see, it's this multi-layers of security, but yet you have ease of use. You know, you just basically have a window that comes up with the operating system, which can be, you know, full screen and that if you want. So, you know, you're basically seeing what you would have normally seen on your PC, right? But you're seeing it on a screen that's virtual, which protects you both in terms of access from Linux to the virtual machine and from the virtual machine to Linux. It's nearly complete with this installation. And as soon as this is finished, I'll be able to boot the system, and I'll be able to load Starcraft and play it. I will have to put a password in. But as long as I can get to the install screen, obviously I know I've gotten there really. So the important part is that after this goes, I'll boot this up, and then I'll show you how it boots into the standard Windows OS, and the video will be finished. So it's installing start menu items now. Unfortunately, no matter how fast your system is, the software, which, for example, Windows XP itself, the time it takes to install is still going to be semi-time consuming, just because of the way that it installs itself. There's so many different things about legacy software that slows it down even on faster machines. Okay. Of course, the best way to learn how to use Linux is by using it, and as your own desktop, because then you're forced to conquer many of the basic hurdles that people encounter. You know, when they start to use it in a business, you've already accomplished 90% of what you need to do with Linux using it on a desktop. And it really is the essence of cloud computing as well, because once you have a system, you know, that has at least a gig processor, gigahertz processor. If you have a low gigahertz processor, then you're going to need much more RAM. But if you have something that's 2 or 3 gigs processor, and you have a couple gigs of RAM, and you have maybe anywhere from a 100 gigabyte to 1 terabyte external hard drive, or even internal, you can use that to access most of what everybody accesses on the web in terms of streaming video and streaming content, even HD, watching HD films in terms of VLC player, which is has all the codecs that you need. And of course, when you're installing all of these things, the best part is as you can see from just watching the screen, there have not been any nag windows, no flashy bubbles that come up and say, you know, have you thought about doing X, Y, and Z to your system? Linux is very, it doesn't nag you, it does what you tell it to do. It's ready for your input. You can do all kinds of things with it, obviously, but it's not trying to sort of force your hand. It's not commercial. It's not profit making, and so therefore, when you're dealing with it, you're dealing with it as a, you could say, as a you know, as an objective business partner. Really, the system becomes a business partner because it's obviously a tool that you're using for communication, you know, for productivity, everything from just writing a simple letter and copying it and pasting it into an email, to you know, playing games, and obviously, even when you buy a new PC, you're willing to shell out a few thousand. The best thing that they think to put on that is, you know, Windows 7. And okay, so you're still dealing with this deeply flawed operating system, but you've just shelled out thousands of quid, and you wonder, why is it that this hardware that I bought, why isn't it, you know, working well? Why do I get viruses? Why is the machine rebooting itself? Why do I put this in and it says it's supposed to work and I'm still getting an error? And you sit there and you have to sit there and you troubleshoot and all that. But obviously with Linux systems, there's not, you're getting the most out of your hardware. So if you have really fast hardware, you've spent that money, you want to put something on that hardware that's going to feature its capabilities, not slow them down, not say, well, it's sort of like, a good analogy is thinking about cars and mileage, and you know, gas mileage, and you become more, you make your engine 25% more efficient, but instead of using that to consume less fuel in the vehicle, of course those resources are used to power additional features. So, you know, if the previous model got 25 miles per gallon, let's say, then your next model may get 28 marginal increase, you know, 28 miles per gallon, just to show that you've made a slight improvement. But then use the additional savings to put in a more electronic components like GPS and everything else. So you're still getting that slowdown effect. You're still slowing things down. And so with Linux, what it does is it doesn't add. You can add features as you want them. So you don't just get everything. You get, well, you know, maybe I don't want power windows, but I want everything else power, and you can like actually turn off the power windows and not have to use them. And there's, you know, in a car, but obviously in Linux you can turn things off, you can turn things on, you can install something, you can get rid of it. And the best part about it all is there's not always, every time you're visiting websites, you're not always thinking, are they hacking into my machine? Obviously it wasn't just phones that were hacked in the media scandal, it were computers and emails, and it's so easy to get into a Windows machine. Like, not only when you're in person in front of that machine, it's very easy to just type, and because the Windows system is so inherently insecure once a person is logged in. But you know, on a Linux machine, you know, by standard, by default, when you first install it, you know, it immediately, at 5 minutes, you know, when it goes into standby, and the person has to type in the password. And, you know, those sorts of security features shouldn't be turned off for convenience, obviously, because when you walk away from your desk, you want to make sure that someone doesn't just have immediate access to all of your information. So it's saving settings, it's nearly finished. And once this is installed, obviously, you know, it's there. It's like I have two operating systems now. I have a Windows XP that I can just click on, I can make it boot up, and I can run whatever programs I want on it native. I could even use that to browse the web, download the latest Internet Explorer. You know, I could use that as my makeshift thing, and the irony is, in a way, is that all my settings will show that I'm running to others on the interwebs will only see that I'm running a Windows machine, and they'll treat my machine as if it's a Windows machine, because that's what they're going to see. Although, Yeah, so you can, but that's another thing is there are ways of making it appear either way. So it makes it that much more secure because they don't know what you're running really, because they see aspects of both, and it can be very difficult for a person to know on the web what you're doing when you're running layers, virtual layers. Okay, so it's booting now. Let's see. That's just to unlock my native screen. Now Windows XP is now loading. Now this should be its final reboot, just as in when you're installing it, you have to reboot twice before I can actually get into the system. Now the CD DVD devices are immediately available. But what I need to do is I need to create a CD that consists, and this is the next step. I need to create, what I need to do is I need to actually use that as a CD image, the Starcraft. And in order to do that, I will need to reboot this system. I go into Virtual Box's settings. Right here, I go into their settings. I can't change settings now because I'm running the system, but I'll need to go into the settings and then add Starcraft as a CD. And then once I do that, I'll be able to play it. But here's Windows XP booting up now in Virtual Box, playing the music. How nice is that? So I've got to capture the mouse again. So don't use automatic updates. The whole point of an ISO image is that it's the same every time. This computer will connect directly to the internet. No registration, please. You can put your name there if you wish. Or as many users as you like on the account. Capture the mouse. And what I'm doing is I'm clicking the right control, and that allows me to take the mouse outside of the operating system. There is something that I can install in addition that allows me to scroll in and out of it, but it's called Guest Editions, but I've not installed that. So now we can see Windows in the background there, small windows. And what I'm going to do actually is now see all the nag balloons that I was talking about. It's the first thing your computer might be at risk, as it's telling me. Which is kind of funny. Take 2 of Windows XP. These are all the nag screens that people like to try to get rid of. Now if I've done things right, I should have an internet connection here because I selected compare, so you can see I've got an internet connection there. If I like, I can go on Facebook. And now people think I'm on Windows XP. You know, this is what it'll see, and of course all my programs are compatible. Now actually, I can go directly to the device. I wasn't even thinking this. I don't have to restart. So if I click on Control to go outside, I can go to Devices, and I can go to CD Devices. And I believe what I am looking for is the DVD-ROM, which is where I actually have my Starcraft CD. And then I can actually show you how that will install within the Windows system. So this is how you install legacy software in Starcraft. I agree to the terms. It's going to ask me for my name and my CD key, and I've got all of that around the corner. But that will install just like a normal thing. I'll be able to play Starcraft within the Windows XP. All the software, that's what's wonderful about VirtualBox, is that Wine is absolutely fantastic and works for a variety of programs, and you can configure it to be brilliant and smooth, but it does require a lot of fiddling to get everything right. Whereas with VirtualBox, once you have the system installed, as you can see here, then you don't need